Hey folks, Mythic ODM here. Today I thought I'd do a quick update on the Pathfinder Remastered and review some of their community blog posts. I fully expect to see many more of these over the next few weeks leading up to the November 15th launch of these books. Now, for those unaware, Pathfinder Remastered will hit the store shelves on November 15th, with a PDF also available on their website at that time. Those who purchase from their favorite local game store should also have the choice of either the full color books or the line art books by Wayne Reynolds. Alrighty, so let's go. We got a few things to go over from their recent posts. I'll have links to all this stuff in the description down below. So first up is a Wizards Remaster. So this isn't a big meaty review. It's not the full character. It's not that sort of thing. It's just more information on it. They talk about, getting rid of the traditional spellcasting schools. So they say the new role for arcane schools is just that, actual mages curricula in Galarian. This allows us to make much more tightly focused schools that really let you sell the theme of your wizard, from a tactical school such as the School of Battle Magic, casting Fireball, Resist Energy, Weapon Storm, True Target, stuff like that, to the infrastructure focused spells of the School of Civic Wizardry, Hydraulic Push for firefighting, Summon Construct, and Wall of Stone for construction, etc., etc. So I think that's going to be a very interesting way to do it, and I think it'll really allow them to be a lot more creative in bringing out schools and theming the spells to those schools. In my last review of this, which I'll leave a link somewhere around here, we talked about the fact that having a restricted to the traditional 8 was always a bad thing because you couldn't really move from there unless you added new schools. A lot of spells fell in between multiple schools at the same time, so it was a little bit awkward all the time. One thing I'd like to point out is the feat that they posted, which is Secondary Detonation Array. It's a 1-action feat 14. To manipulate spell shape, which is the new wording for meta magic. And of course, it's a wizard feat. So it says you divert some of your spell's energy into an runic array. If the next action is to cast a spell that deals damage, has no duration, and area of effects, a glowing circle appears in a 5-foot burst within that area. At the beginning of your next turn, the circle detonates, dealing 1d6 force damage per rank of the spell to all creatures within the circle, with a basic reflex save against your spell DC. Now, if the spell dealt a different type of damage, the circle deals that type of damage instead, or one type of your choice if the spell could deal multiple types of damage. I do like that spell. It'll allow you to do some burst damage, and it'll be very interesting to tactically move your wizard into where they need to go. All right, next up is the GM Core preview. So this one is very, very basic. It is just telling you what is going to be the basic chapters, the foundation of the GM Core. Going into, there's an introduction chapter, there's a running the game chapter, which is going to be probably the most important part to me, because that it tells you how to create environments, preparing adventures, creating characters, planning and running sessions. So this is going to be really good for game masters just to learn how to actually run the games, which is always something that every game master needs. Building games. In the next part, the chapter is going to cover your need to build your own adventure, campaign structure, world building, variant rules, etc., etc. They'll be able to tell you how to create things from scratch, adapting existing materials, building your own hazards, items, and creatures, which is probably the most sought after thing, is just making the game your own by building your own monsters. It'll go into a chapter for the Age of Lost Omens. And then it goes into the subsystems section, which talks about things like the influence subsystem, the research subsystem, infiltration, dueling, and a lot more stuff, which is great. And then we get into the treasure trove, which is, of course, the fun stuff. That's the magic items. And it goes through all the different items that you can have and what they've done to change them. So that'll be a fun thing. Again, there really isn't a ton of stuff that you can get into without really going into each chapter. So that's why I see this blog post being a very short one. And I think once we see the actual book, which again, in my review, we talked about a little bit better. All right, lastly, we're going to get into the larger one. This is the preview of spells and spell casting. and kind of their thought process behind why they did what they did. Now, currently, there's a lot of people complaining in the community that they're nerfing spellcasters because they're removing the trait bonus to cantrips for damage and stuff. And they do explain what they were doing and what they were meant to do. So let's take a quick peek at what they are talking about here. So they removed VS&M because, as they talked about it, they were tied highly to the OGL content. They were redundant with traits. So there were some shades of nuance here. Most of the time, the players needed to remember that material, somatic, and focus components added the manipulate trait to a spell, and verbal components added concentrate. This new system just removes those and tells you exactly what you're supposed to be doing when you're running your character. There were a ton of exceptions to make classes play as intended. So as they have in the Pathfinder core rulebook, the Bard, Cleric, and Druid all had exceptions to how their components all worked, which is just rough for brand new players to come in. So I think this will kind of level the playing field and explain a little bit better to new players, especially. These are your traits. This is what you have to do. If it has you can have an opportunity attack on you. You know, if there's a concentrate, you have to sustain, or if it's sustainable, etc., etc. Classes wanted more freedom to define how they cast spells. So as the game has grown, both over the course of first and second edition, more class concepts came up that wanted to cast spells with a different particulars and presentation. And we've already seen this in the new playtest packets. Ultimately, we decided we prefer to let classes define how they cast and let the theme dictate their mechanics, rather than have to have a consistent system that must either restrict classes or be undermined by them. The next thing they get into is the spell statistics. And this is kind of a big thing, which is interesting, and they talk about cantrips as well. So we're going to go into this a little more detail. All right, so in spell statistics, so again, in the War of the Immortals playtest, the Animist is trained in spell attack modifier and trained in spell DC. Now, it doesn't say divine, and there's a reason for it. So this is going to change multi-classing a lot, because what they're doing now is you just take the highest proficiency bonus you get. So there are 5 proficiency levels: untrained, trained, expert, master, and legendary. And that will now be the base proficiency for all of your spell casting, no matter what. It'll still be modified by your attribute bonus, but it will not be, you take a rank, or you take a, let's say, a wizard, and they are expert in casting arcane currently, and then you take a druid subclass, and now you're only trained in primal spells. That is really odd to track the different bonuses. So this just basically levels it out. Your proficiency is the highest in your trained spell attack modifier or your trained DC, and then your attribute stacks over top of that, which is great. So it reduces the tracking, having multiple proficiencies, enable interesting character concepts. Though you might think it'd be fun to play a cleric with a bard archetype, the spell statistics could be so much worse than it's worth pursuing. And that was one of the big things. And let the attributes do their work. So we already have another way that secondary spells can acquire can be worse, and that is to have, you know, different attributes. So again, being a cleric, which is going to be wisdom based, versus a wizard, which is intelligence based. So if you do not have a bonus, a good bonus in both of those, one will lag behind the other. But again, to me, that's fine. It's not a big deal. So cantrips, this is the big grumble right now in the community, and I'd love to hear your comments below what you think about these changes. They explain why they have changed them, and let's go over those. So it's consistency with how other spells work. So most spells just deal dice damage, and cantrips were an outlier. Making spells look and function more consistently across the board helps in understanding rules, especially for new players. So as an example, Fireball just tosses regular D6s, does not add your attribute modifier. So that is what they mean by a lot of spells do not add your attribute modifier. Matching their damage to our intended spell benchmark. Now this is the big one. One target cantrips were supposed to deal around 6 damage, with focus spells and spell slots dealing a bit more. Adding the attribute modifier pushed the damage off the baseline numbers. And that is true. If you have an 18, you've got a +4. So instead of, your minimum, if you're throwing, let's say, a D8, your minimum is 5 and your maximum now is 13. So that is a big swing, especially if they're trying to deal around 6 damage. That's why they're changing that. Avoid penalizing characters who have damage cantrips from innate spells or multiclassing twice. So characters who got damage cantrips from multiclassing or as innate spells from ancestry feats or the like often have a lower attribute modifier than a dedicated spellcaster, and we're dealing with both lower chance of success and lower damage if they hit. This is a smaller issue, but often led to players being unhappy with their character options. I'm not on board with that, mostly because the fact that I think if you're a dedicated spellcaster, you should be doing damage than someone who just happens to have that ability because of an ancestry. That to me is just the way it should work, but to them, apparently it was an issue. So cleaning up how cantrips work for monsters is another smaller issue, but a pain point for GMs. It was unclear how to apply the spellcasting attribute modifier to monsters with cantrips. So I have run into that as well, and I do understand what they mean. So they built a good example of a cantrip built in the new manner is Caustic Blast, which now uses a burst and works more like other spells rather than having the player need to learn how splash damage works and the purpose of a single spell the way Acid Splash did. People always get splash damage incorrect. New players, even veteran players, still screw up splash damage all the time. So this is much better. I like this one. So it's a 2-action cantrip, Acid Cantrip Concentrate, which means it's verbal, and Manipulate, which means it has somatic components. So it is arcane and primal, which means sorcerers, wizards, and druids and such will be able to use this. It has a 30-foot range and a 5-foot burst area, which I really, really like. So it's a basic reflex save. It says, you fling a large globe of acid that immediately detonates, spraying nearby creatures. This causes the area to take 1d8 acid damage with a basic reflex save. On a critical failure, the creature also takes 1 persistent acid damage. So I love that. It is, theoretically a cantrip that could do 9d8 damage. It bursts in a 5-foot radius, which then can theoretically hit 9 squares around it, if you can count the center one as well. And each creature takes a d8 damage. Theoretically, you could be throwing out, if for some unknown reason they're in a 15-foot wide hallway and they're all piled up, you could theoretically with a cantrip do 9d8 damage, which is pretty insane in my opinion. Now, I may be wrong on the way that works, but it's a 5-foot burst, which means it is around the area. So they say they've also revamped non-damaging cantrips. And here we have the examples of Read Aura, which removes the school and now speaks more directly to identifying the item, and Light, which incorporates both parts of the original Light spell, and remove the dancing lights to provide the players an alternative that allows for more creativity and flexibility. That is one of the biggest things that you'll see, is there are so many spells that nearly do the exact same thing, but just have different ways of saying they're doing it. And removing that kind of duplication to me is a good idea. Combining them, like they're not just dropping dancing lights, they're adding dancing lights option to the light spell. And to me, that is a win-win for the player because now it gives you options when picking that spell. So if we look at the Read Aura cantrip, it is a cantrip, Concentrate, which is verbal, Detection, and Manipulate. So the traditions are Arcane, Divine, Occult, Primal. Basically, everyone gets this. The casting time is 1 minute. It ranges 30 feet and targets 1 object. So you focus the target object, opening your mind to perceive magical auras. When the casting is complete, you know whether the item is magical. You or anyone you advise about the aura gain a +2 circumstance bonus to identify magic on the item. If the object is illusionary, you detect it only if this effect's rank is lower than the rank of your Read Aura spell. So you can heighten this because it is a 1st level spell. You can heighten it to 3rd and 6th. At 3rd, you can target up to 10 objects. And at 6th level, you target any number of objects you want. All right, next up is Light, and we see it's a 2-action cantrip that has a Concentrate, Light, and Manipulate trait. Again, is Arcane, Divine, Occult, Primal. So everyone gets this as well. It has a 120-foot range. So it says duration until your next daily preparations. So you create an orb of light that sheds bright light in a 20-foot radius and dim light in the next 20 feet in a color you choose, which is kind of fun. If you create the light in the same space as a willing creature, you can attach the light to the creature, causing it to float near the creature as it moves. You can sustain the spell to move the light up to 60 feet. You can attach or detach it from a creature as part of this movement. It says you can dismiss a spell. If you cast the spell while you already have 4 light spells active, you must choose one of the existing spells to end. There's a great Star Trek joke in there. At 4th level, the orb sheds 60-foot radius and dim light for the next 60 feet. So you are a walking beacon. All right, so they do talk about how focus points work from the core rework. And, just to reiterate, it is just the number of focus points in your pool is equal to the number of focus spells you know, to a maximum of 3. But the big change is you can refocus for 10 minutes to regain 1 focus point, regardless of how many you've already spent. So before it was you had to spend a focus point in the encounter before you could get another focus point back. It was really weird. So now you can just spend basically 3 10-minute refocus actions and get all of your spell points back if you have, for some reason, used all of them. They say this alone should make focus spells more dependable and simpler to use and track, which I also agree. They've also taken a look at a few focus spells that didn't function as well as focus spells and tuned them up. Let's take a look at Waking Nightmare, for example. It can now make a creature paralyzed instead of fleeing and gives the creature extra damage, which is pretty damn cool. So Waking Nightmare is a 2-action with 1 focus. It is uncommon, is Cleric, Concentrate, Emotion, Fear, Focus, Manipulate, and Mental. So all of these tags are going to be the basis of all their spells going forward. Range is 30 feet and targets 1 creature. It is a will saving throw, and the duration does vary. So it says you fill the creature's mind with a terrifying vision. The target must attempt a will save. A creature frightened by this spell takes 1 additional mental damage each time it is hit by a strike. That is crazy good if you get that off first, and then everyone piles on top of that person. So critical success on the target is unaffected. Success, the target is frightened 1. Failure, the target is frightened 2. If it is asleep, it wakes up and is paralyzed for 1 round. That is just amazingly cool. Critical failure, as a failure, but frightened 3. So it'd be frightened 3 and is paralyzed for 1 round. You can heighten this and the mental damage increases by 1. So this could be a pile of damage. If you were heighten this by 1 level and start doing an extra 2 damage on each strike, and you get to go first on this. So first of all, you'd cast a 2-action spell and then maybe hit them. So they take an extra 2 damage. Then let's say your rogue gets a couple shots at them. And if they're a dread striker, they gain precision damage on that as well. Then you get your fighter rolling in or your barbarian rolling in and take a few more swings at this person. Those little amounts of damage add up extremely quickly over time. So I think this is going to be a great spell. Now you talk about normal spells. So let's take a look at the Thunder Strike spell, which I believe used to be Shocking Hands. So the Thunder Strike is a 2-action 1st level spell. It has Concentrate, Electricity, Manipulate, and Sonic. Traditions are Arcane and Primal. So again, this will be great for the Druid. Range 120 feet, targets 1 creature. It's a basic reflex save. You call down a tendril of lightning that cracks with thunder, dealing 1d12 electricity damage and 1d4 sonic damage to the target with a basic reflex save. A target wearing metal armor or made of metal takes a -1 circumstance bonus to its save, and if damaged by the spell is clumsy 1 for 1 round. Next, they show the Tree of Seasons as a 2-action spell. 6 is Concentrate, Manipulate, Plant, and Wood. I love that. It's a primal spell. Duration is 1 minute, so you cause a small tree to instantly sprout in an unoccupied space on the ground. 4 seeds grow from the tree, which filled with a magical and different one of the 4 seasons. A creature can interact to pluck one of the pods and then can either throw it up to 30 feet as part of the same action or do with a separate interact action later. When thrown, a pod explodes in a 5-foot burst, dealing 66 with a basic reflex save against your spell DC. The damage type depends on the season of the pod. Electricity for spring, fire for summer, poison for autumn, or cold for winter. I love that. When the spell ends, the tree withers away and the remaining pods rot, leaving behind non-magical seeds. So this is basically the rework of fire seeds, which is fine, and I have no problem with it. And that's it for the review of current community blogs on Paizo. You can check them out on Facebook because they do post the links to these all the time, which is a good way. Probably on Twitter as well. I'm not really on Twitter, but There probably are. I do know they are also on Instagram, so my guess is these blogs will show up there as well. So that's it for me this week. Let me know what you think about all this changes in the comments. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about the spells and the casting changes, because those are going to be very big. I see where they're coming from in the design and why they needed to alter the cantrips. I know it is a pain point for a lot of people, but I think, you know, once we get used to it, it'll be fun. Do you think this makes casters weak? Does it balance with the fact that they can do these enormous amounts of burst of damage that do not always target AC? They do not use the multiple attack penalty if they're saving throws. You know, they're affecting things other than the base AC, which I think is another reason to have this change in there with losing the attribute bonus. So I'm leaning to the yes side of it. So Electric Arc and now this Caustic Blast are going to be an incredible power combo in the arsenal of Arcane and Primal casters. I'm excited to see the changes to the spells and see what they've done in the future, how they've streamlined the spells, what they've changed, and how they're making it easier for newer players to kind of jump in and be a caster. Casting is usually one of the most intimidating things for new players because there's a lot to it. There's all these different spells and stuff. It's kind of easy to be a first level fighter. You swing a couple times, you step, you raise a shield, etc. That's pretty easy. Picking your spells and picking the right spells for the day can be very, very nerve-wracking on a brand new player, which is where the GM needs to really step in and help coach their new players. I'm hoping to see more of these blogs, but if not, we know for a fact that everything will be out on November 15th, and that's when we're going to start getting really into the crunchy review of it, and I cannot wait. If you enjoyed my content, please remember to hit like and subscribe below, and don't forget to hit that bell for notifications on new videos. That's it for me this week. Thank you all for watching, and may all your games be full of myth, mirth, and magic.